Hey gang, Resolute TV, episode 6. It's flying along. The second episode's flying along. I don't understand why it's so much more efficient this time. Maybe because we've done it a little bit. Crazy times in the world, crazy times specifically in the US at the moment. Absolutely mental. This week's episode, we've got Topher Field joining us from Korea. He's talking obviously a little bit about US election, but also the protest lockdowns that went on down there over the last couple of weeks. We've also got Michael Plumhoff, who's actually part of Keith B. Taylor's Kentucky Hemp Fall Guy team. So those guys got ripped off by the Kentucky government to the tune of about $1 billion with a hemp legitimate business. And here, as thank goodness, because I absolutely love chatting with Stefan Livera is back to give us an update on the Bitcoin world. I noticed my little Bitcoin investment starting to go sky high. I can't buy a Ferrari yet, but I'm pretty, it's fun to watch. God, it's fun to watch. And we're going to touch on Bitcoin and the effect that it's having, or that the US election's having or going to have, and what's causing the current spike in prices. How are you this morning, Stefan?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back, Dean. Always a pleasure to chat with you. So today we've just got, it's a very exciting time right now for Bitcoin because the narrative is just there, right? There's just so many people who are learning about Bitcoin now, and it's come from such a small base, right? Like it's still so small in a global point of view. The total market for Bitcoin is something like 260 or 270 billion dollars, which is tiny compared to, like, Apple has almost $200 billion in cash, just Apple, one company, right? So that gives you some perspective, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, I mean, with the election and all this stuff, from a presidential election point of view, my take is something like, if we get, like, obviously, I haven't checked the latest, but it seems like it's still super close, but it looks like kind of Biden is in front, but there's obviously questions around the electoral legitimacy and things like that. So, I mean, look, I'm not an expert, so I can't comment on that, but
Did you see a dead guy got elected?
Yeah,
that's not even a thing. And now, I probably lean more Trump than I do Biden, but that's based on a competency thing in my head. But a Republican person who is deceased got elected the other day. That's got to tell you there's some massive, massive flaws in the system.
Yeah, for sure. I
reckon he'll be a pretty efficient politician, that guy now. He'll probably get exactly the amount of stuff done that I reckon most politicians should get done.
Well, that's the funny thing, because people are now saying that it's almost like gridlock is bullish. You know why? Because it means there's a lower likelihood of tax increases and a lower likelihood of regulation coming, and that's about as good as we can hope for. Or at least some investors and analysts are saying that.
Just freeze it. Stop. Let's see what's actually necessary and what's not. Could be a good experiment. They did try it a few years ago. Something similar happened.
Exactly, and this is an incredible indictment of large government, right? That the fact that gridlock is a good outcome, that's like a preferential. They would rather have that than, So I mean, yeah. I guess
when we say they, I mean there's some of us who would love to see it, and some who go, no. I think it'll be fantastic. I got really excited at the thought of it. It's like, let's just see really just how valuable our governments are and how useful they aren't.
For sure. I mean, of course, like this is one of those weird things where, I think from a Bitcoin perspective, Trump probably would be slightly better in the sense of giving Bitcoin a little bit more of a runway, like more time for people out there to accumulate Bitcoin and secure it and like learn to kind of build the system around it. Whereas in a Biden world, it might be a bit more of an accelerationist world, right? Because he might be more inclined to raise taxes, do things like capital gains tax on people, or even there was discussion around taxing unrealized capital gains, which would be crazy, right? So now you could sort of argue that might actually be more kind of high risk, high reward. Like a lot more people might be driven to Bitcoin because they want an escape route. They want an escape hatch. They need a valve out. So I guess that's kind of the high level way I'm thinking about it. But look, at the end of the day, it's a system, right? It's not just the president. It's like this overarching system around them. And that's really what's doing a lot of the damage to society. And so in practice, is it going to be that much of a difference if we get Trump or Biden? I don't know.
You don't know. So there's no direct predictions on a Trump or Biden win relative to Bitcoin. Well, that's a shame. I was hoping you were going to say, look, if Biden wins, sell the house and buy Bitcoin, or the other way. Come on, I'm waiting for the hot tip, Stefan.
I genuinely, I like you said, like I think it's one of those things where if Biden wins, it is genuinely more short-term and medium-term bullish for Bitcoin because it kind of spells out, there's going to be more intervention coming. Whereas if it was Trump, you might think there might be slightly less government intervention. Like there'll still be more, but it'll be less than Biden. And so you might be less inclined.
Trump's like a big government, small government lunatic, and Biden just doesn't even hide the fact that he likes big government. Trump, like most conservatives, we're for small government, but at the end of the day, they still love their bloody government.
Oh, of course.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So, mate, as I mentioned at the start, I noticed my little very, very minor portfolio of Bitcoin. And even if I had $1 million, I wouldn't say more because otherwise the ATO would be ringing me and up their bum. Mate, it seems to be going up quite rapidly. What's the story? What's causing it?
So, Dean, you are now entering the stage of being captured by Bitcoin, right? So when you first buy some and you start to see it rise and then you start wanting more. And as every Bitcoiner goes through this journey, they start thinking, damn, I wish I bought more back then when it was cheap, right? And this has happened when it was $1. This happened when it was $10. It's happened when it was $100. It's happened when it was $1,000. And you're going to get the same phenomenon. You're going to be like, damn it. Like, so right now, as we speak, so it's November the 6th, and the price right now in US dollar terms is $15,462 for one full Bitcoin. That's 100 million.
In Australian terms, just because obviously.
Let me put that in AUD. So that is about 21,200.
21,000 Australian dollars for a Bitcoin.
Yeah. And I think especially once we get back to all-time highs, then you'll start to really see the kind of things just start to go crazy because everything in this space is indexed to price, right? The number of developers, the press coverage, the number of businesses starting in the space, the developer attention, just like the number of new wallet signups and the number of new exchange users and all these kinds of things. So I would suggest for people who want to, who've been looking at Bitcoin and thinking about it, but haven't taken the plunge, take the plunge. Now's a good time to kind of take that plunge, even a small amount, right? Like buy $20, just $50, whatever small amount, just get started and start learning. Because
what I've noticed is on the HODL app, most people have a minimum of $200 to part with the Bitcoin they have. That seems to be their level. I don't know why. So I guess the interesting question is, right, I'm sitting here watching a little investment and it's tapping along nicely, and I'm going, oh shit, that's cool. And I've seen it with my little stock portfolios and stuff. This isn't my first rodeo playing these sort of games. What's actually causing it to happen? So most people go, okay, things go up, things go down. So in stock market world, people go, it's caused by presidential elections, it's caused by market forces, whether it be good crops, bad crops. What in the world makes Bitcoin go from say $10,000 per Bitcoin to $20,000 per Bitcoin? What causes it?
So the thing here is we are seeing an adoption of a new money, and that's why it's difficult for people to grasp what's going on here. So really what backs Bitcoin in a sense is its credibility of monetary characteristics, right? We know it's scarce. There'll never be more than 21 million. We know the person who holds Bitcoin and does it correctly, they can spend those Bitcoins without being censored or stopped. It allows things that the normal fiat banking world, like US dollar, Australian dollar, they just can't give you. They can't give you those assurances. And so the thing with money is the more liquid it is, the better it is. So actually Bitcoin at $20,000 is literally more useful than Bitcoin at $10,000. And over time, like the more the liquidity grows, it's just like a growing network effect, and it's like a virtuous cycle. Now it's different from other things like a stock or a bond. And that's why it's confusing for people, because it's not a productive stock. It's not like a business. It's what it is you are essentially using this new monetary system, and you're kind of entering into this new monetary system. That's really the way to think about this. And so what we are seeing now is companies and a lot of companies buying Bitcoin because they see it as better versus their other options. And that's the same for even us as individuals, right? Because if you leave your money in the bank, even if you got $1,000 in the bank in your transaction account or whatever, that's losing value over time, right?
Yeah.
In a year's time, that might only buy you what $900 does today. And so people are looking for ways to protect themselves. And what's happening is they're looking for what's the best way to protect myself. Well, historically, people have done things like property and equity and things. But now Bitcoin changes that. It actually changes what we use for our cash balance, right? Our transactions. But obviously, there's all these different factors, right? You got people who are speculating on it. You got people in the third worlds and the developing worlds who are using it to send money around because they've got like the diaspora thing where maybe they move out of the country to work and then they send Bitcoin back home for their family to be able to buy things. So it's kind of, there are lots of different ways to think about it, but ultimately we just view it as it's a growing monetary effect, and it's like a money that's outside the government, so it just can't be so easily controlled.
Yeah. Look, which obviously that's one of the aspects that attracted me to it when we first met, and you were like, I do Bitcoin, and I went, what the hell's Bitcoin? Tell me more. And I'd seen all the ads and all the bullshit, but it was just it was like a unicorn at the time. So, and now I'm seeing it in real time and going, okay, this is really, really becoming a thing. Like I can see the process happening, and obviously it helps having a guy like you that I can kind of call and go, hey, Stefan, what's going on with this? That's great. But, mate, going forward, now we talked about the halving a heap of episodes ago, and your special will be released in the next week and a half, I think. And I've actually compiled the first 3 or 4 episodes into one, and then the second, just to make it a sort of a little digestible, for people who want to really get into it and whatever. But what about the halving happen, and then what happens after the halving is that's when Bitcoin starts to go a bit batshit, a period after that. Is that sort of what we're seeing now? Is that reflective of this jump? And how high do you think it's going to go?
So I do think this is just part of the halving cycle. So typically the halving happens, and then sort of 6 to 9 months afterwards, that's when like the next run starts. And that's historically what we saw. In 2012, mid 2012, there was a halving, and in 2013, around kind of March or so, we saw a run start.
Yeah. So how long ago was the halving now?
So the recent halving was it April or May? I think it was May. I think it was early
May. I think
And so, I mean, where are we now? We're in November, right? So it's kind of like by the time we kind of rolling through to the start of next year, I think we'll be kind of close back to all-time highs in Bitcoin terms. So in US dollar terms, that's around $20,000. So we're not that far off, right? What are we, 15 something now? So it's kind of coming back up. Yeah. And then so typically in terms of where it could go, I mean, I'm not really much of a price predictions guy. There are all kinds of people predicting all sorts of things. There's some people saying 100,000, 200,000. I don't know. Who knows? But I would just see it like this is a process to just learn about Bitcoin and understand what makes it better. You have to first think what makes good money, and then you're starting to think about what other things that make Bitcoin better. And then you think about what's the longer term case for this thing, and then you're starting to think down the right pathway.
Yeah. No, look, mate, it's pretty exciting times. I'm getting to see it in real time. And we call this segment Bitcoin for Dummies for a reason, because I literally have no expertise in the field whatsoever. And I'm sitting here with a guy who has all the expertise in the field. Well, certainly, I mean, how many people are out Bitcoining you on planet Earth? There's only a handful from what I can imagine. As far as Australian Bitcoin gurus go up there, Stefan's right up in the top. I've had people reach out going, how in the world did you get Stefan Livera to talk about Bitcoin? I said, I asked him. We met. I said, hi, let's talk. Anybody who doesn't know Stefan, great guy, really A-grade bloke. And we've met in person. We're not just Facebook buddies or anything like that. We have met in person. Mate, I want you to plug your show, because I really want to push this Bitcoin thing for people at the moment. So you've obviously got the Stefan Livera podcast. Where do they find that? I'll get Dia to put all the links and stuff in the description. I think I've been a bit of a slack ass on the links and stuff for people, and I don't want to take the piss out of the guys who are the regulars on the program, because you guys are the only reason this sort of exists, really.
That's totally fine. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm sure people know where to find me. So, look, the basic answer is go to stefanlivera.com. But for most people out there, what I would suggest, get a podcatcher application. So Apple iTunes, Pocket Casts, AntennaPod, there are a few examples. Go in there and search Stefan Livera podcast, subscribe, and then basically have a look through some of the first few episodes, right? Listen to episode 1, 2, and 3, see how you go with that, and then just kind of go through the list. And then over time, you'll very quickly pick up the episodes. Many people in the Bitcoin world have kind of learned just from listening to my show. It's a very fast way to quickly get up to speed on these things. So that's probably the best way for people to find me.
Yep, and I'm the translator of anything that's too over the top to simplify it down for you. So, Dev, mate, as always, you and I have put this down ice cold, mate. We're so efficient now. It used to take us about half an hour to work out 15 minutes worth of material. We've got it down to 15 minutes, which is almost perfect. Mate, thank you as always. Brilliant to talk, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Dean. See you soon.
Righto, guys, ladies and gentlemen, everybody in between, boys and girls, whoever's watching. A really exciting day today. Now, if you recall season 1 of Resolute TV, we had a very fine and very interesting gentleman by the name of Keith B. Taylor, also known as the Kentucky Hemp Fall Guy. Very, very interesting interview I did with Keith. What an interesting guy to catch up with. And the guy's got a story that really could make a movie. It was pretty full on, pretty interesting, pretty wild ride. Now, what we've done is Michael Plumhoff joins us this morning. Michael's one of Keith B. Taylor's right-hand men in this war, in this fight that he's fighting to try and regain his business. And what Michael's done is he's reached out and he's put together a bit of a presentation on how it's all unfolded, what's happened, why it's happened, and where it's up to now. How are you today, Michael? Thanks for coming aboard, mate.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And who I am, it all started off with hemp and cannabis advocates talking on Facebook. And I was brought in from Danny to meet with Keith to hear his unbelievable and just messed up story. And I'm a salesman by trade, so I was follow the money son, and I was looking to find out what was going on here. And as you said, this would make a great movie, a documentary. So please understand that that's what I started on in 44 weeks ago in January of this year, is debriefing about 90 days worth of thousands of emails from Keith Taylor. Okay, and actually putting it on a spreadsheet by date and characters. So we are trying to put a documentary together, not just for profit, but just to explain how crazy this story is, and to get elected officials and law enforcement on the hook, and to be identified on where things went wrong and how and why. So a lot of this is in the documentary role. You got like Tiger King with Netflix, everybody's talking about, and that's where we came up with the title, The Kentucky Hemp Fall Guy. And Keith is and was the mastermind of bringing industrial scale hemp, 2,300 acres, to America, and through his relationships with China and HMI Group, and that just totally went afoul, and he was used and abused. Okay, so that's a brief summary on. I'm a sales guy trying to sell a story that I believe in, that I've read the evidence and looked at the documents, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not practicing law, but I have seen the law bills that Keith Taylor was charged and paid on through 4 separate law firms. And the courts are meant to be for the people. And with the barristers and the lawyers and the esquires all thrown in there, we the people are losing touch with the governing law, with enforcement of law, and writing bills and repealing laws. So everybody really needs to take a close look at that, on the deception, the manipulation, and just the frustration when it comes to dealing with the courts, the lawyers, the law enforcement, and the ever-changing goalposts. That's what a lot of people are saying is within DEA and FDA, USDA, the alphabet boys of America have really shat the bed here. Okay, so that's a brief introductory of me.
Mate, a big part of what we do at Resolute is we certainly call out people who deserve to be called out for bullshit. We don't shy from that. And you know, you mentioned the lawyers, and you're not practicing law. I don't think you need a law degree to know the difference between what's right and wrong. And while there's grey areas in where people's moral standing on things, some people may be against the hemp industry, and that's sort of fine. But the reality is, and I've seen a lot of this paperwork, Keith B. Taylor sent through an awful lot of this stuff for me to look at, probably far more than I could really go through. But, you know, with some basic skimming, you can see that essentially the deal was done. It was ratified by the necessary authorities. A couple of people I've spoken to are, oh, well, if he was in bed with China, maybe that was why he got stitched up. And I'm going, well, I don't know that that's necessarily the case, because America does business with China all the time. You know, it's not uncommon and Australia does business with China all the time as well. So this isn't a new thing. From what I saw, there's an awful lot of evidence that basically said to me in a very layman's simple terms, Keith B. Taylor got some investors. He had a plan. He put the plan together. He had approval for all these plans from all relevant authorities, and said relevant authorities, after the investment had been made and all the infrastructure was pretty well in place and the job was done, went, sorry, Mr. Taylor, you've not met one of our 2 trillion regulations, and you missed one of them. You have failed to cross a T or dot an I or whatever you've done. So we'll take the lot, thank you, and that's ours now. You can go away. Is that sort of pretty simplified version of?
Pretty much simplified version, yes. Hostile takeover and abuse of power, abuse of process, and court protocol and so forth. And the courts was used against him. And then, as I will explain, there's a lot of attorney misconduct. Okay, and that is a civil charge where insurance policies, just like malpractice in the doctor's world. So when you have one attorney being the dean of litigation and working with GW Pharmaceuticals, the same time as his direct competitor, King's Royal Biotech, right there, that's a red flag. That's attorney misconduct. Now, can we get other attorneys to file suit and to go after them? No, it's the fraternal brotherhood. And you heard of the blue line with law enforcement, and then within the law areas and so forth, the courts and all that, they protect one another. And it's just a big circle jerk and just a really bad scene. So that's definitely what went down for one part.
Yeah, legalised organised crime, mate. It's like the government, same sort of thing. It's approved,
right?
But
the mafia, you know.
If you or I did the same thing, we'd be in prison. But because they're lawyers or because they're politicians, they get a pass, and it's a pass that would never be extended to the rest of society. And that's where I generally draw a line and you know, end up doing things like these sort of projects whereby we call them out, mate. So you put together a bit of a presentation for my audience, yes, that we can hopefully share out and draw as much attention to this corruption and nonsense as possible. Keith seems like a pretty decent guy from my hour talking with him. Mate, how would you like to kick off your presentation?
Okay, I would like to talk about current events and current tasks and actions. And with that being said, in October 18th, Keith Taylor had the ability to submit public testimony to the USDA in regards to the hemp industrial research pilot program and project. Okay. In this, he calls out Kentucky Department of Agriculture, KDA, and they are the state firm that handles what are you growing, what did you sell, if you have hot crop. Now, please understand, audience, that cannabis equals stem, hemp equals stalk. Very basic stuff there that I haven't seen, and I'm getting ready to make that into a t-shirt, okay? Because it's understanding that you can have very great buds of THC, trichomes, and really great product, but it's on a thin little stem because it's cannabis, and marijuana is a term that some people use. Hemp grows in a stalk, okay? But yes, they're the same species of cannabis, and that just through cloning and just working the plant, you can go ahead and get the THC out of the hemp strain. But you can have hot crop, okay? And a hot crop is when it goes THC above 0.3. So then you're supposed to burn it, bury it, or chemically destroy it. So in Keith's testimony that now is at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, okay, submitted electronically, submitted in by mail, and with research numbers or control ID numbers. So we have the numbers that this report is in the system. Now, please understand that William Richmond, and I'm name dropping here so people can understand that we're researching this as private investigators, as private documentarists, private journalists. And the mainstream media won't pick this up because of the haves versus the have-nots. And it's not about just money. It's about resources and relationships, okay? So with that being said and done, we have this we have this in at USDA, and we're looking for people to ask the questions. What's going on with the public testimony and the public comments of King's Royal Biotech? The second thing is understand gatekeepers. This is where people who are afraid or just frustrated with working with government. There are multiple layers of gatekeepers that will spin you, will ignore you, will talk story with you, etc. And understand that the United States House Oversight and Reform Committee, the majority is Caroline Maloney, and the minority is Jamie Coomer. Now, Jamie Coomer was the agricultural Department of Agriculture in Kentucky before he got into the House. Fox guarding the hen house. We can't make it more clear than this. And so we have went after Caroline Maloney. We have talked to Danielle, the secretary, and we got it docket and clock it. We have the spreadsheets of when we talked to somebody and what they said to us, okay, in this documentary, and just logging evidence like an undercover informant would. You log your activity. Okay, this is the amount of evidence that Keith Taylor has, and it's just amazing. So with Caroline Maloney, you know, in the description, we're going to have, you know, here is the waste, fraud, abuse tip line, and just put in your name and just say, what's going on with King Royal's Biotech? Why are you gatekeeping? This technique is called swarm, okay? And you can soft swarm, be polite, or you can hard swarm. But it goes to the Coca-Cola numbers. Marketers, politicians, they don't care unless you have numbers. They fear numbers in many different ways. And the one is bodies, and then the other one is auditing, when you want to check out their books and so forth, or check out the reports. So that is the second thing that we have, is we really are going to Caroline Maloney and really ask her, what is she doing? And there are some other elected officials. So this October, we are really explaining the haves versus the have-nots to anyone who wants to listen. And if you have money and if you have connections with elected officials, you have campaign managers. The Bramer Group is related to Mitch McConnell. Look it up, okay? Vertical Wellness is a couple counties away that had a hemp processing plant open up in October the same year that Keith's crops got stolen. It doesn't take an investigator of any merit to realize, wait a second, it was here, but now we got a processing plant over here, and the truck went down this highway here. So it's just so frustrating to see the story, and it's still evolving. So let's also look at the real big picture. Okay, cannabis is threatened to be taken off Schedule 1 to put onto Schedule 2, prescription only. And Joe Biden has talked about this. Okay, so now I'd like to kind of go into like 10 talking points.
In real terms. So obviously for an Australian audience, what's the difference between the two? How does it work currently? How does it modify over?
Okay. Schedule 1 is completely illegal, and heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, ecstasy, acid, or on Schedule 1. No real medical use. Okay. Yep. So then that's where the DEA can kind of step in and flux its muscle. Now, imagine this, and this was brought up to me by Danny today. If the DEA didn't mess around with cannabis, there is not enough money to afford the agency itself. Okay, because the amount of cocaine and the amount of heroin and all that kind of stuff is so small compared to cannabis, marijuana. And they know this, we know this, but the advocacies and the bloodhounds and the town criers and the pot clangers, we're having a hard time getting that message across. So we're hoping by doing podcasts like this, people can finally say, aha, when you legalize cannabis, then the DEA is going to be chasing around little smaller deals, and they won't be able to afford the engine in the occupancy of our lives. And then the prisons go down. Texas is a strong for-profit prison state. Okay, California as well. So when you stop locking people, throwing people in a cage over a plant, you got a dramatic economic shift, and no one is really crunching the numbers. And a lot of the politicians, they're just a bunch of dumb stoners, broke stoners. You know, that's the how they treat us. But by coming on podcasts like this, and we're really appreciative of your audience and what you do, Dean, is let truth, and let people speak. And it's not like I want to be heard. I just am trying to get this message out so I could see results in progress and cannabis made legal and home grow. Okay, I'm very close to Washington, D.C., and they have home grow for many years now. And that's where citizens can have 3 flowers and 3 seedlings in their closet, in their house.
Now, here's an irony. Now, what Washington's your capital city now? Our capital city of Canberra has a very similar. They're the most liberal as far as can have cannabis growing. I think it's 2 plants before, decriminalised, whatever. Isn't it funny that the 2 capital cities are allowed to, but nobody else? That's strange to me.
It's haves and have-nots. So the lawyers around the Beltway and K Street is the lobby groups of Washington, D.C. And you have the lawyers and so forth, and they're like, you pay me enough money, we'll make it happen, Captain. And that's really what we're seeing here, okay? But nobody's willing to pull that out. And I've been talking with several states. Why can't we be just like DC? Give us our home grow. And in DC, you can walk around with 2 ounces, okay, 52 grams of cannabis. And those are some pretty good, hefty bags or Ziploc bags, freezer bags going around there and so forth. But the cops in DC, they're like, okay, so what? Did you do any crimes? Did you hurt anybody? I don't have time to investigate cannabis, hemp. Okay, I got to go after bad guys doing bad things. That's what protect and serve is all about. All this other drama, we just won't look at it. So you have local level law enforcement that just won't mess with it. You got other local law enforcement bored to tears, so they find stuff to mess with. Okay.
Mm.
And that's where this auditing process comes, and the militarization of police. And why do they have, Bradley fighting vehicles or to go ahead and ram doors and so forth? And they're going after cannabis more than they are going after coca or heroin and all that other stuff, because the general population just doesn't mess with it.
Yep. Yeah. No, look, it's crazy.
Yep. So, yeah, and it's calling them out on it. That's so important. So if I could, GW Pharmaceuticals was the first one to have a patent on CBD pill format. Well, pill. Welcome to America, right? And so Big Pharma has a lot at stake, especially getting from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2. Now, what a lot of Americans are saying is, wait a second, it's been 80 years. We see that prohibition of cannabis is politically motivated. Okay, you wanted controls over the votes. You want people locked up so they can't have the right to vote. Enough is enough. We're smarter than that. It's 2020 now. You have been caught. Quit using the plant for your political motives. But people are afraid of the alphabet boys. The IRS is going to come audit you if you become public. The DEA is going to be door knocking you, or people be sitting out in front of your house. And all that kind of big brother stuff is freaking people out and delaying the advocacy. Look at Keith Taylor. He was a viable businessman and so forth. And he brought a technology from China into the United States. Murray State out of Kentucky was the beginning of the hemp research pilot program. They used and abused him. He grew what he grew. And then they were like, well, wait, he's just a dumb stoner. And that's the thing, that a lot of politicians look at people that are cannabis and they just slap that stigma on them. Just another dumb stoner. And they thought they could throw him some hush money and he would go away. He would take it and run. But he's a man of character. He's a Marine, and he's a Stanford economics graduate. So he understands the money at play here. And what the problem is the cover up, the filling of holes and so forth. And the people who stole the reports and his product, we have documentation saying that there was 25 acres that was destroyed. And then it says it was sold. So KDA, being the Department of Agriculture, just has sloppy books. And the DEA, DOJ, the Kentucky State Police, Internal Affairs, Keith has a charge on him, intimidating a participant during a legal procedure. And that case is still open. And it is a silence abusive process, an abusive power tool. There was 87 protesters on the lawn of Daniel Cameron's, the Attorney General of Kentucky, during the Breonna Taylor crises. Yeah. And 2 days later, the charge got dropped. 2 days later, okay? Keith has had this gag order or this gag charge on him for over a year. So that's something that needs to be investigated. And really understand, did he threaten a business partner? Because judge, and he was a mayor, not a federal judge, not a bench judge, but that's a cute title they have in Kentucky, is they call them judges instead of mayors. And he received through paper, $700,000. While as an elected official, that's a federal violation. This federal violation was written up by an FBI agent in San Jose, California, and sent down to Louisville, Kentucky. Do you think it got looked into? No, it has not. Professional courtesy is what they said. Now, follow me along here, because this is where we really start tearing into the FBI and how Epoch Times, a conservative Chinese newspaper, was all Spygate. Yeah. Keith Taylor went to Epic Times office in Los Angeles, has photographs, pointed at the chart about resign and demote.
Yeah.
And we can't get the FBI to look at this case. We can't get the Epic Times Judicial Watch because of the conservative, the red, that are making money off of keeping cannabis illegal. If you have hot crop, if you have hemp, okay, that can't be sold within the distribution cycle of regular hemp because it's hot, it's low grade cannabis. It's brick cannabis. People will still smoke it, okay? So that's something that people have to understand, that Keith has identified all the players, all the shipments, where things are, but we can't get to that investigation. So let the audience know that the second name, Douglas Leff, okay, he is the Assistant Director, Inspection Division, and that means that he's in charge of all inspecting the inspectors, okay, the investigators. So we have gone to his office. He gave Keith a phone number, and then 2 weeks later, we sent him a package of about 45 pages. That phone number is disconnected now. How convenient, So a lot of people can't get their minds wrapped around, wait, you went from California, Kentucky, Washington, D.C., Stuart L. Platt is the Office of Professional Responsibility. He's the one that got us in touch with Leaf because he did his job. But we keep on emailing him and not getting anything back. They're going silent. They're covering this up. We don't know who from up high is saying, hush this up, okay? But again, by going on programs like this and identifying people's jobs and their titles and their disconnected phone numbers that track and trace, it was a working number before, but it just went dead. So that's very important to understand, that that's sort of like the fall discovery is the public testimony, the package being delivered to Liff and Maloney, and we're just constantly bringing up the KDA. They're doing bad records keeping. If you audit, investigate, the commissioner of KDA said anybody but Keith Taylor, because Keith Taylor was asking questions. And so I'm like, wait a second, you can't do it like this. You got to do it like that. It's going to cost a little bit more money. They don't have the bodies to inspect the product. Okay. And when things go hot crop, you got to burn it. You got to bury it, or you got to chemically destroy it. And it's just getting moved out in trucks. And you have cannabis in the front of the truck, 3/4 of it, and then at the tail end of the truck you have hemp, and then you have all your hemp paperwork. And if you get stopped, it's like, hey, why are you buying hemp farmers? But it's like, wait a second, we know hemp can go hot, so either you leave the plant alone, okay? And a lot of people, I'm going to really throw something out here, because you got Aboriginal people in Australia, the original people there, okay, and then we brought over African American slaves, and you heard about reparations. How come no political, white, black, brown, has ever said, we're not going to tax cannabis anymore. We're not going to, regulate it anymore. We're going to regulate it like onions, But right now, that's your payment. Imagine that, America. If we all just said, quit the taxing and the vertical marketing and the haves versus have-nots, and just say, let's just treat it as a plant.
Yeah,
okay.
The Larry Sharp argument in New York over there. He and I had a discussion a couple of weeks back about very similar. His whole theory is regulate cannabis like onions, treat them like onion farmers, and it wouldn't be a problem. What's the issue?
There you go. What is the issue? And the issue is elected officials creating this protection barrier of the wealthy, the haves. Then they're included in the haves, and then you and I are the have-nots. We don't have access to high-grade cannabis in hemp because they're goons, being DEA, local law enforcement, marshals, FBI, are the first ones on the scene. Keith Taylor was calling Jonathan Miller of Frost Brown Todd, leader of the Hemp Roundtable, some nasty names. Who shows up at his door? FBI. Hey, what's the problem? Quit calling them names. That is the hurt feelings and so forth. But it's who had law enforcement in their pocket, who was doing their bidding of the haves. And breaking this all down, people are really seeing, we just definitely got a have versus a have not. If I could, 5, using the laws, the courts, the regulation, the law enforcement, it's created a cartel, okay? And when you have judges who have 3 complaint letters in the JCC, Judicial Council Commission out of Kentucky, take no action. Okay, so we've been documenting this horrific story month after month, week by week, and that's why we talk in the week of. Okay, so it's just letting people know that he created an industry with the textiles, and the technology has gotten better, but we're fighting against big energy, we're fighting against big pharma, and when people don't really realize that, the amount of money that goes into the lobbying, we have NORML, we have MPP, Marijuana Policy Project, and we have Drug Policy Alliance, funded and founded by George Soros. Well, I called them up trying to get 20 questions about cannabis, and they referred me over to NORML. And I asked them, don't you have your own research? And no response. So people got to understand, you got to keep on asking questions. You got to work the angles. And we have a saying at Team KRB, new names, because we got tons of old names that we've already contacted and have put on notice and called them out and so forth. But the kidnapping of Keith Taylor, and just the bogus paperwork and the confusion. Did he have an assault rifle pointed at a camera? One attorney, where's the paperwork? So all this has been just a duck, duck, goose kind of, or a gingerbread man, catch me if you can. We're trying to get to the evidence, but, California Attorney General, they're like, leave my people alone. And we're like, well, they signed the paperwork.
Yeah, for sure, mate, for sure. So where do you see it going for next? What's the next couple of steps? Or what are your next moves? What are you going to be doing to sort of tackle this problem? And
call to action is pretty much getting Maloney and Leff to respond to the package. Going to Sonny Purdue of the USDA and William Richmond and having them look at the public comments. Okay, we got to let these people know that they have been checked. And then Mitch McConnell and Jamie Coomer and just the entire Kentucky corrupted background there and in the situation, they need to know we need to be pushing for IA, investigations and audits. So if people would want to help, and we'll have contact information in the links and so forth, but it's very simple. It's just we need to push instead of begging. And someone got really upset with me, and I was like, well, wait a second here. If you're asking the federal government to make cannabis legit and legal, and you're not going after the elected officials who are profiting from it, aren't you just begging? What's the motivation? Okay, so we need to stop being beggars, and we need to be we the people to, okay, you want to play this game? Okay, let's investigate and let's audit and show everybody the numbers, how much is alcohol and so forth derived with the DWIs and those lockups, okay? And if you made cannabis legal, and people could medicate people, but don't call it a medical claim. But we know the game's rigged. The FDA is behind all this medical stuff, and calling them out on it is what we need to do as a nation and as countries. Anybody that has power over the plant has power over people's lives. And let me just wrap up. We've lost, okay, check this out. We've lost the Black Panther, okay, Chadwick. We lost Eddie Van Halen to cancer. Now, if we didn't have this dirty 80 years of stigma, and if Chadwick and Eddie had THC, CBD on the daily, don't you think they would be still with us and they didn't have to go through that burning pain of chemo? So anybody who has lost somebody to cancer, just really look at the government, because they want the big farmers just hurting us. You got a closet space, grow your own. You're a citizen, and just don't be stupid with it. Don't drive on it. Oh, I drive better on it, but just keep it, private space, right time, right place is what we say in DC. And, the cops don't really bother us. So that's what I have.
My argument's always, consenting adults can do whatever the hell they want to be perfectly fair. It's none of the government's business. There's nobody in any government positions of authority, I think, that have any capabilities superior to the rest of us whereby they should be dictating to our lives. And cannabis fits under that category, mate. So, look, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a great 30-odd minutes. Mate, I'd love to get you back in a few weeks, 4 or 5 weeks. We'll get a few more updates, and we'll sort of might even slide you or Keith, whoever's keen to do little updates, maybe 10, 15 minutes every few weeks, and I'm more than happy to let you guys sort of come on board here while we're doing bits and pieces. So, and we're looking at expanding the program a little bit anyway, because we seem to have some really amazing content coming up. So, mate, thank you for your time, thank you for your story and your commitment to this particular issue. It's a massive issue. It's certainly very, very important in the modern Western world, or what's left of it. And without guys who are committed and brave enough to put their necks out there and have a bit of a crack, we all just become slaves to a system that doesn't serve us. So thank you very much for your time, mate. Is there anything else you'd like to sort of shout out as a bit of a bit or do?
Just thank you for what you're doing. This is important to have a platform and to get around the bias. And people are talking. That was Oprah's old show in Baltimore, and we need to let people talk about the abuse of power and the abusive process. And like you said, when you start, we got to call them out on the daily over and over again. And I thank you for giving us a platform to call out the bad guys.
Mate, 100%. Thank you very much. You have a fantastic day, and we'll talk soon.
Righto, guys, we're back for another episode. I'm thrilled to bits again for another catch-up with Topher Field. Topher's brilliant. If you've been keeping track of our little project or any of Topher's little projects, it's all happening in the wide, wonderful world of freedom-based activism in Australia. Mate, thanks for coming on again.
Mate, my pleasure. I enjoyed it last time. Looking forward to it.
Should be good fun. It's always good fun because take the fun out of these things, and why would we bother?
Well, I'm certainly going to be having fun. I've got myself one of these little beauties and a little bit of this. So, now I'll be enjoying myself, even if you're not.
Feeling left out. I should have gone and grabbed a glass. Oh, mate, what are you celebrating? We haven't won yet.
Look, to be honest, there's no winners in this US presidential election. I agree that Trump is less bad. But my gripe is that out of 350 million people, were you referring to the US election, or were you talking about what's happening locally?
Add it all in, mate. Add it all in. It's all the same.
Add it all in, yeah, right. Look, when it comes to the US election, no, we haven't won yet, or Trump hasn't won yet. I think he's the lesser of two evils. But come on, seriously, in a country of 350 million people, are these the best two that they can come up with? Seems like a pretty weak effort to me.
Mate, well, we were just talking about Adam Kokesh earlier when he and I were. I went on his podcast here a few weeks back, and we were talking about the fact that we've got it. Well, they have a choice between a kitty sniffer and a pussy grabber. So it's a pretty sad state.
And they've done it to themselves. They went through a whole pre-selection process where they had other candidates they could have gone for, In the case of the Democrats, they had some much better candidates that would have given them a much better chance of winning. They looked past them all and went straight for the old white guy.
Mate, and if I was going to throw somebody at it, if I had been the Democrats, I would have been throwing Tulsi Gabbard at it. It was to me, she was the pick of the Democratic bunch. She's not too far over into the weeds. Smart, good-looking, military veteran. They can even throw the female argument at it. They can throw the the ethnic argument at it. Look, ticked every box. But apparently, upsetting Hillary is not a good idea if you're Tulsi.
Look. It is. You're exactly right. She ticked every box. And because American elections, in American politics, voting's not compulsory. So turnout matters. And turnout is a product of enthusiasm. If you get people passionate, fired up, enthusiastic, where they feel like they're voting for something big, then they'll show up. They'll get off their backsides on voting day, or they'll fill out that form and post it in. In the case of Tulsi Gabbard, you had a number of firsts. You would have had your first Latino. You would have had your first female president. And she would have actually really appealed to a lot of the center ground voters. The military veteran aspect would have brought a lot of the Republican-leaning but middle ground type voters would have gone, hey, I respect that. And, here we got Trump, who was a draft dodger, and here we've got Tulsi Gabbard, who was in the military. That would have brought a lot of people over. I agree. I think she was hands down the strongest candidate out of everybody. She came across very well. She knew her subject matter. She could debate very well. But it was very, very clear the way she was treated by the Democratic Party right from the get-go and how they handled her in the conventions and everything else. It was very clear that they were never going to let her get anywhere near the nomination. And now the Democrats are reaping the rewards. They could have picked a strong candidate. They didn't. They picked an old white guy who, and I don't say this next thing without any, I say it with no malice whatsoever. I wouldn't wish this on anybody. But when you watch him speak, watch the unedited versions of him speaking, the way that he gets lost so frequently in his own thoughts and forgetting where he is, who he's talking to, these sorts of things. Everyone makes mistakes from time to time, but it's such a consistent thing with him. It's very clear that he's past his mental peak. And I don't say that with any glee whatsoever. That's the future for all of us, right? We're all going to get there. Unless we die young, we're all going to get there, right? So I say that with no glee whatsoever, but his age, unfortunately, is a pretty big factor. And our Democrats going to turn up in large numbers to vote for another old white guy who's been in politics for decades and hasn't fixed anything. And now he's saying, hey, if you vote for me, I'm going to fix things for you. Well, clearly they're not voting out in the sort of the blue wave that was expected.
No, certainly not, mate. And you're 100% right. And Trump was 100% right. You've been there for 47 years, Joe. What have you done, mate? You haven't done much when you were probably at your peak capacity. And there's a fair amount of there's a reasonable argument that the guy does have some racist tendencies. And, like the what was I don't know if you saw the podcast thing he did where, if you can't tell between me and Trump, you ain't black. That just about tells you all you need to know.
Yeah, look, I could forgive one or two of those things as just a bad attempt at humor, a bit out of touch, trying to be hip, but not really scoring. But when you do look back on him, it's pretty clear that the Democrats have historically been an extremely racist party. The Jim Crow laws were Democrat laws. They are the ones who have opposed emancipation of slaves. They opposed the arming of black people and allowing black people to have weapons. They've got a long racist history, and Joe Biden was a part of that more recent racist history. Is he a racist now? Look, I think that's a term that gets thrown around far too much. And I haven't looked into him enough to want to smear him with that label specifically, but his record is certainly not playing well to minority groups in the US. And we're seeing on the numbers at the moment, Trump appears to have picked up an unprecedented amount of the Latino vote and the black vote in the US in this election. They have seen something in the last 4 years that they have liked and have turned up to vote for him this time.
Well, and a lot of them seem nervous, specifically the Latinos who have seen a lot of their, sort of Latino-based countries have gone down the socialist path and haven't ended well. And many of them are going, well, my old homeland is really not doing anywhere near as well, and they're, draped in socialism. It's a bad idea. It's always been a bad idea. Certain elements of it work. If you look at the Scandinavian countries, there's an argument that certain elements work relatively well. But overall, not a good idea.
Yeah, look, it can work for a while. It's a little bit like a parasite where you can have a parasite, let's say a tick, I remember as a kid, I saw a tick that was well and truly embedded into the back of a what's that stumpy-tailed lizard we've got in Australia? I can't think of the name of it, but it's a big, chunky lizard thing and stumpy, rounded sort of tail, and it had this tick embedded in the back of it. And the lizard was clearly quite lethargic and dying as a result of obviously the toxins from the tick, to the point that we just went, okay, let's just let nature run its course. We're not going to try and intervene here. But there was a period of time where that tick was able to feed off that lizard, and the lizard would have seemed fine. You know, there would have been a period of days or weeks or longer, perhaps, where anyone could have come across this lizard and gone, well, it's got a tick, but who cares? It's fine. It's going along just fine. It's running around. It's catching food. It's doing all those things. And then over time, the toxin sets in. And that's exactly how socialism kind of works. And that's what we're seeing with Scandinavian countries right now. They still have a reasonably strong capitalist ethos. They still, broadly speaking, allow the free market economy to work, which means that they're still quite strong. And the socialist parasite that's on their back isn't doing them a lot of harm. But over time, that parasite is going to grow. When we saw a lot of the illegal immigration through into Europe, sort of the waves of migrants making their way up through, whether it was Italy or through Turkey or what have you, a lot of them went and settled in those Nordic countries because of the very generous welfare programs and so forth that they could access there. These are going to start to take their toll on the welfare systems. And over time, that parasite is going to become more and more toxic to the host. And this is what we see. Look at Venezuela, a country very, very close to my heart. I was there in 2014 when Chavez was in Venezuela. He was being celebrated by Western media. He was being celebrated in The Age and on the ABC. They were giving him column inches where he was writing op-eds, and they were publishing them here in Australian newspapers, hailing him as a hero of this new dawn of socialism that works. And then, of course, when the wheels fell off, when the parasite started to kill the host, and that could no longer be hidden, they turned around and said, "Oh, well, it wasn't socialism, to begin with.
It wasn't real socialism.
That's right, it wasn't real socialism, or it's America's fault. They've gone and crippled their economy." Great. Okay, so here's a country in Central America with very close ties to China, easy access to the entire South American continent, Europe, and the entire western seaboard of the African continent, but they can't find anyone to trade with, apparently. So that American sanctions have just shut them down. Come on.
And they do have some pretty amazing resource bases. Venezuela is
it's a stunning country. It's so heartbreaking to be there and see what it's become. They have the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, larger than Saudi Arabia, larger even than the US. They have this amazing precious stones, gemstone industry there, emeralds that come from there that you just won't find anything like that anywhere else in the world. Salt mines, another huge potential export. They've got a tropical growing climate and beautiful, beautiful soil. I mean, just this beautiful, deep black soil. Left to its own devices, the jungle just runs rampant. It loves it up there. You could get amazing tropical crops every single year. And as for tourism, phenomenal. Like genuine Caribbean coastlines along the north coast of Venezuela there. They've got beautiful island resorts there. Even in Caracas, I mean, when I was there, it was the most dangerous city in the world outside of a war zone. There was nowhere else you could go that was more dangerous except a war zone. But even there, you would look at the buildings because it used to be in the top 10 wealthiest countries in the world, Venezuela. And you'd see the architecture.
Number 3 at one point, am I correct? Number 3.
I'm not 100% sure. I should actually look that up so that I can say with authority exactly where they were, but they were in the top 10. And, you look at the architecture and you can see it. It's like going to these sort of mining towns or gold rush towns where there was a time when they had money, and you see the architecture and then you see what's happened since. And you kind of think, well, in Venezuela's case, there was no reason for that dive. There was no reason why that had to happen. But it did happen, and it was due to socialism that it did. And, now we've got Americans wanting to follow suit. We had Bill Shorten in Australia wanting to follow suit. Even our supposed conservative parties are now following really socialist policies in terms of monetary easing, devaluing their own currencies, pushing inflation. Even though the official inflation figure remains low, the reality is you can't do monetary easing without devaluing the dollar, which is inflation by any other name. And because they're all doing it at once, it's not so visible. All of the dollars are devaluing at the same time, and so compared to each other, you're kind of like, it's not so bad. But if you actually look at what you can purchase now take the US dollar, which is the one that has had the most research done on it since they floated the US dollar, it's lost about 97 cents of value. It's now worth only about 3 cents in terms of purchasing power compared to what it was worth back then. And that's just because of literally decades of following these Keynesian sorts of monetary policies, which it's not overt socialism, it's not communism, definitely, but it's a slower road to the same place, and that's where we've been on now for decades.
Mate, for sure. Me and Adam were talking about it when we had our chat the other week, and this is on his program, and we actually went through and he made a video with me where we compared the 10 pillars of communism, and we actually went through, ticking them off with Australia and America to see which one of the two countries is more communist. And I'm ashamed to say we beat out the Americans by about half a point. Our gun laws put us over the edge on there, and we actually have about 8, either entirety or in part. Pillars of the socialist 10 points, and that was pretty scary. I'd never thought of it quite like that. And then Adam and I obviously had this little bounce backwards and forwards, and that's where we landed, which was terrifying. Yeah.
So you'd be familiar with the Cloward-Piven strategy?
Vaguely, but for our guests, let's get into it.
Nutshell: Cloward and Piven were a couple in, I'm going to say the 50s, but I'm not sure exactly when, that came up with this theory for how to turn America into a socialist country without needing to fight them, without having to wage a war. Sorry, if I don't keep it going, it goes out. And essentially,
if you don't keep it going, you're not relaxed enough to enjoy the discussion, and that's what we're all about here.
This is true. The TLDR version of the Cloward-Piven strategy is basically to continue expanding the welfare system. That parasite thing that I was just talking about, it's exactly that. Continue expanding the welfare system, make the benefits more and more generous, make sure they apply to more and more people. Don't put any kind of restraint or constraint on spending or eligibility criteria, etc., until it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then eventually it kills the host. It causes an economic collapse. And socialist theory holds essentially that socialism follows naturally from the collapse of capitalism. And so they're what's known as accelerationism. If we just move quicker towards that collapse, then we'll get to where we want to be faster. And that was the theory that Cloward and Piven put forward. And whether we know it or not, whether it's intentional or not, whether anyone's trying to deliberately get us there or not, at the very least, unknowingly, that's exactly what we've been doing ever since. We've been expanding welfare programs. It's now true that more than 50% of Australian households depend on a certain amount of government funding in order to meet their monthly obligations. That came out of the last ABS survey that was done. And you kind of go, well, all right, they're not depending on the government for all of their income, but if the amount of government money that they're getting stopped, they would have defaulted on something by the end of the month. And that's a pretty scary thought. And what that means is it's almost impossible to wind it back. It's almost impossible to reduce benefits when more than half of the voting population are dependent on the benefits that you want to reduce. And that means you've got a one-way ticket. You're on a one-way train to an eventual fiscal collapse and economic collapse driven by Cloward-Piven strategy, driven by the parasite killing the host.
Yeah.
And that, unfortunately, is where we are.
100%. And you look at the amount of middle class welfare. I know, with the Liberal Democrats, we're always banging on about middle class welfare. They're the first places we need to cut. Why somebody on $100,000 a year needs government support for childcare is beyond me. I'm sorry. Raise your own kids. It's not up to the government to be funding all these things. And family tax benefit and family all this stuff that just creeps into people's lives, and people it doesn't even occur to them that they're stepping onto a treadmill when they do. They just oh, cool, I'll take that. Great, no worries, thank you. Not seeing the big picture of it's actually going to feed the beast.
Well, I have to say I side with Rand and Rand on this, who was of the view that if the government's offering you money, you should take it. And I know that puts me at odds with some libertarians who take a more purist kind of view of if you're philosophically opposed to it, you shouldn't take that money. I take the view that I'm philosophically opposed to taxation, and I will take back anything that I can get from the government. I did my time in the Army Reserve, and I used to joke with people that it was the best tax return you could ever get because I gave them taxes and they gave me bullets and hand grenades to play with. So I'm of the view that if you're paying your taxes and you're being made to pay taxes that fund things that you don't agree with, then you should be happy to take back whatever you can from those taxes. Otherwise, if you take that purist view, and I respect those that do, I'm not saying they're wrong, but I definitely disagree because you're putting yourself in a position where financially you're now fighting with one hand tied behind your back. Your taxes don't change just because you've done the honorable thing and not taken whatever the government was offering. You're still having to pay the same taxes. You're not getting the benefits that other people around you are then getting funded by your taxes. and then yet you're still trying to live the same life. You're still trying to make your way in the same country with the same costs and all of that sort of thing. So, I'm not a purist in that sense, and people knock me for that sometimes, but that's my take on it. If the government is offering to give you back a little bit of your money, you should take it. On the other hand, if the government is offering to give you more money than what you've paid in taxes, that's where I would draw the line and say philosophically at that point, I couldn't morally accept that money because now I'm taking somebody else's. But if it's my money coming back to me, I think I would encourage people to take it.
Very, very reasonable. And, and that's an argument I have with people quite often, in real life debates and discussions. But, well, if you don't like paying tax, don't use the roads. It's like, well, if they're willing to let me opt out of tax, I'm happy to not use the road. No problem. Or pay when I use it. But they're not going to let me opt out. Therefore, I'll use the roads. I'm paying for them whether I like it or not. So I might as well use the bloody things.
Yeah, and there's so much there. I mean, you go back to the US pre-income tax, pre-World War I, which is when they brought in the income tax as a temporary wartime measure. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program, as they say. They had roads, they had a military, they had infrastructure there. Even today, I get really pissed off with people who say, "Oh, but without taxes, who will build the roads?" Well, fucking me, all right? I've been working for 5 years on getting a go-karting center up and running, and one of the things that we've had to do is, and we've already done it, we've had to build and pay for over 1 kilometer of road to be upgraded from graded gravel to actual bitumen, with all of the engineering, all of the drainage, all of the curbing, all of everything done, a fully engineered road. We paid for that. And that was a condition of getting our permit in the first place. So don't give me this who will build the roads bullshit, because it's the private sector that's building most of them anyway. Yeah, maybe not the freeways and stuff like that, but all the roads that you see going into new housing subdivisions have all been built using private money and using the profit that the developer was going to make out of developing that land. And a lot of the roads that you're seeing going into industrial estates and elsewhere, they're being paid for by the people that are building the factories and building the businesses that are actually going in on those roads. So I utterly and outright reject this bullshit idea that without taxes, who will build the roads? Me. I'm building the roads, right? Get over yourself.
That's it, mate. I'm with you. I tend to go out and do X, Y, and Z, and people go, well, how would you do this? Well, I try to contribute wherever I can. And a good example is watching Domino's Pizza fixing potholes.
Yeah.
In the US, we get our cars keep getting busted up by how shit the roads are. The government won't fix it. We'll fix it, but we're going to put our logo on it.
That's right. That's right.
There's the world working as it should.
Yeah. If a problem is bad enough to need public money, then there would be people who would fund it privately. If a problem isn't bad enough that people would be willing to fund it privately, then it shouldn't be funded out of public money. There's this massive catch-22. Anytime public money goes into something, if they say, but this is really, really bad and it's really, really serious, okay, then people are going to be willing to fund it privately. And if they're not, then by what metric is it really, really bad and really, really serious, such that you can justify stealing people's money to pay for it if people aren't willing to pay for it themselves? So, 100%. Yeah.
100%. I work with charities. I run a charity, sort of a charity event every year. How will you fund the hospitals? Well, we raised $4,000 for one of the hospitals last year. I mean, I'm sure that's not the biggest number in the world, and it wouldn't run the entire hospital. But if there's enough people committed and out actually doing,
well, you look at the hospitals and the universities that were built anywhere from sort of 120 years ago through to about 400 years ago. They were almost always named after someone, right? Because a captain of industry or someone made a lot of money, and then they turned their attention, and this is all to do with the marginal utility of money. The more money you have, the less useful each dollar is to you, and you start to be worried about things that as a poor person you're not worried about. If you're worried about your next meal and feeding your kids, you're not terribly worried about your reputation. Right? Yeah. If you've got squillions of dollars and you couldn't spend it all in your lifetime, even if you tried, you'd be willing to spend a lot of that money on your reputation because the marginal utility equation has changed. And that's literally what a lot of people did. They built hospitals, they built universities, they built schools, they built houses for the poor, houses for widows, and they put their names on them, and they were literally paying money for their reputation. That you could criticize them and say, well, that's just a vanity project. Sure, but it still does the job. It still does what it was supposed to do for the poor. Even today, there's still a lot of that going on, despite the fact that the government has intruded so much into what should be the private charity sector and has kind of displaced a lot of that private activity. I'm one of the committee members on the Dandelion Wishes Gala down here in Melbourne. We're a fundraising organisation run actually by Lincoln and Veronique Wolf, my business partner, thankfully, very, very amazing couple. They started it, and frankly, they do most of the work. We just get to sort of free ride on it a little bit because they can't help themselves. They work so hard.
Yeah.
But in the last, what is it now? In the last 5 years, they've raised, I can't remember the exact number now, but it's well over $2 million for the Monash Children's Hospital down here in Melbourne. And they are the single biggest source of funding outside of the state government for the Monash Children's Hospital. And this was just a charity that was started by a couple who had a number of kids, and they ended up with a child who was very premature and was in intensive care for a very long time. And they benefited from the skills at the Monash Children's Hospital. And they turned around and said, right, what can we do to repay what you've done for us? And so that's an example of private sector charity on a larger scale, not to disrespect what you're doing, but there are different people that work on different scales and respond to different things. And if the need were there, people would respond. We see that with the Black Saturday fires, what was it, 11 years ago or so around Melbourne now. It was well in excess of $100 million was donated and then completely misused because the state government basically took control of it. It went to a lot of the bigger charities that have very poor oversight or very high overheads on the money that goes through their hands, and ended up being very poorly used because of all of the amount of bureaucracy that got involved. But we can clearly see that when the need is there, people respond. There are people who are willing to step in. There's the next one.
This year, mate, they've loaded hundreds of millions of dollars into coffers for the bushfires this year. As recent as that, and the money's being squandered, mismanaged, and and there's all sorts of nonsense going on where people aren't applying for any of the funding because their house might not have met council requirements or whatever previously, and all sorts of ridiculousness.
Look, the amount of misery that was caused by government regulations going onto the areas that were burned by the bushfires in the Black Saturday bushfires. So for those who want to know, this is a Punch Rare Corojo. Very, very nice stick.
There you go. There's the ultimate recommendation. Do you get a kickback from the company or what?
No, I don't. But actually, myself and another cigar-loving friend of mine, we've just started an Australian-based cigar subscription service. The first one where we're doing weekly sticks. I'm not allowed to talk about it in anything that's accessible publicly because there's regulations about all of that. So if anyone wants to know more about that, then hit me up on the Topher page on Facebook, send me a message, and I can tell you privately all about it. That's perfectly legal. But I can't tell you anything more than just it exists.
Right. So we'll put something in the description about contact Topher if you want good cigars.
If you want a wide variety of. Sorry.
I was just about to say the other thing too. If you've got a link for your charity stuff as well, we'll chuck all that in as well because the whole point of being pro-voluntary is promote voluntary organisations as much as we can.
Well, we've actually got the online version of the Gala coming up soon because of all the restrictions. We can't do it. So ordinarily it's held at the Palladium at Crown, and we'll have anywhere from sort of 750 to 800 people crammed into the Palladium, and it's an amazing night. The entertainment, the food, everything is just phenomenal. We can't do that this year, and so we're doing an online version, relatively cheap for people to sort of pay for tickets, and then obviously there's auction items and these sorts of things, which is how we raise the money for the hospitals themselves. But yes, I'll give you a link to that because that would be good to be able to promote that. But going back to what happened after Black Saturday, and I nearly did a video series on this, but it actually became, I interviewed a number of people in preparation. I was thinking about writing it, and it actually just became too emotionally hard to sit with these people, which is horrible because they obviously didn't get a choice. They had to live through it. But rewind 11 years ago, and I just wasn't emotionally in a place where I was just going to be able to push through and hear their stories and do that. And I regret that now. I wish I'd followed through and done that. But the situation was absolutely awful because the government came through all the areas that had been bushfire affected and a bunch of areas, that were nearby, and completely rezoned it and applied these new fire proofing sort of rules to construction. The types of materials you could use, the types of windows that you had to have. And what it did was it increased the cost of building 2 to 3-fold. So even the places that had insurance on the houses that had burnt down could no longer afford to rebuild. But also because the cost of building on that land had just been jacked up so much, the value of the land crashed. So they were underwater from a loan point of view. They had a certain size loan on the place that was a perfectly responsible loan given the value of the property previously, but was now massively in excess of the value of the property now. They couldn't build a house to live in, and these people ended up trapped paying off a mortgage and living in a caravan on a desolate piece of land. And then the council started giving people a hard time because they weren't rebuilding permanent homes, and they weren't going to allow them to keep living in caravans indefinitely, etc. And just the whole thing was just awful. The suicide rate in the area is heavily impacted by the Black Saturday bushfires are frankly a national disgrace. And the way that we mistreated those people, the way that the government mistreated those people and added misery on top of the disaster that had happened to them is just, not to mention the irresponsibility of not allowing people to pick up fuel off the roadsides to burn in their own, wood burning stoves, and not allowing people to cut down dangerous trees on their own land. I mean, everything that led up to the Black Saturday fires is a disgrace, and people should have gone to prison for that. But then the way that the government responded and added misery on top of that disaster, it's an untold story, unfortunately, and I'm partly to blame for that story still being untold. But it is just such a heartbreaking example of how bureaucrats and governments who think that they're the good guys and they think that they're doing the right thing can just make life so much worse.
Mate, and look, I did the Eden Monero by-election recently, and that a lot of that whole region, was decimated in bushfires, and I toured around and I met people, and it was heartbreaking. You could see, and it's exactly the same thing. It's you put all this bureaucracy in the way of people doing practical things and real life things, all in the name of some. And as you said, they think they're doing a good job. The reality is they're just creating bullshit and weighing down on people because, we've got a regulation to keep you safe, but it's going to cost you another $50,000 a year. I haven't got another $50,000 a year. I'll live without your safety net. Thank you very much, if you don't mind. My house is burnt down.
And that principle, once you understand it, you start to see it absolutely everywhere. You start to realize just how much our government is costing us, not in terms of just the taxation and everything else, although that is, one thing that I say regularly, and I apologize if I said it to you last time I was on the show, your government is the most expensive thing that you will ever buy.
Yep.
Right. We think that it's our house or our cars or whatever it may be. No, your government is the most expensive thing that you will ever buy. And that's just in their direct financial cost to you. But there's also an enormous amount of indirect financial cost. And I'll give you a few illustrations that people don't like hearing. It's uncomfortable for people. But when we put a standard on people such as you may not have more occupants in your vehicle than it was originally designed for, right? If it's a 5-seater car, you can't have more than 5 seats in it. Then what we're telling people is if you can't afford this particular standard of vehicle, then you're not allowed to have a vehicle at all. There comes a cutoff point where if you have another kid or whatever, and you can't afford to upgrade your car to a bigger car, well, then we're not going to let you have one. We're not going to let you have a car. If you can't afford a house that meets our certain minimum sizes, well, then I'm sorry, but we're not going to let you afford a house. Right? We're going to turf you out on the street or force you into share housing or some other thing. We're putting this artificial floor where you might have come from an Asian country, for example. Many of the immigrants that came over, the Vietnamese that came over, etc. They would have been very, very happy for their family to grow up in something that you and I might look at and go, oh no, that's too small, right? But they would have been happy, and they would have chosen that, and they would have been glad to have been able to pay that much less. Right. Yep. Because compared to what they were used to culturally and how they'd grown up, that was still a lovely place for them to grow up in, and for their kids to grow up in, and for them to live. And we say, oh, no, I'm sorry. Unless you have a house that's as big as we would want it to be, then you're not allowed to have a house. Right. And we actually create these cutoff points below which we push people down. And we make it really, really difficult for someone to get a car when the car has to meet all of these different standards. But that's multiplied by every single thing in your house. The garage roller door has to meet certain Australian standards. The toilet bowl has to meet certain Australian standards. The flooring, the window coverings, everything else. And again, the bureaucrats can defend it and say, oh, but this is about reducing fire hazards. This is about reducing water consumption. This is about, they can justify it. And they're the good guys in their own minds. But the end result is that what we're saying to everybody is, I'm sorry, if you can't afford these products, then we're not going to allow you to afford any products.
We're increasing your cost of living for your own good, whether you can afford it or not. And if there's a cost, well, that's not our fault because we're trying to look after you.
And then they say, oh no, why have we got this homelessness problem? Why do we have so many people dependent on government housing? We have this huge problem with poverty. Well, yeah, of course, because you've taken life and you've created a flaw on life where if you're not earning above this amount of money, then you are fucked. Right? Yep. You can't get into housing. You can't get into a transport, into a vehicle. and then people's life options disappear. They can't get employment because they can't travel to it, and the whole knock-on effect. And we end up with ingrained multi-generational poverty, which is exactly what we see in Australia. And a huge amount of it is coming from bureaucrats jacking up the cost of living for your own good.
I did a 4-year apprenticeship in Canberra. I don't know if you know what the cost of living in Canberra is like, but it's relatively hefty depending on. I was a 4-year apprentice, so first-year apprentice, $5.95 an hour, and there was no way in the world. I had a really good job at a really nice venue, great place to do a trade, and I thought, how in the friggin' hell am I going to live anywhere near this place that I can afford? Mum and Dad weren't wealthy, so they weren't going to go, oh, here's a flat in the city, but we sat down and we worked out there was actually a caravan park that had long-term sort of accommodation, like, an old caravan with an annex. I lived there for 4 years, used the public restrooms because this thing didn't have toilets or anything like that. And that's where I lived for 4 years while I did my apprenticeship, because it was close enough to the city that I could get to and from. And you know what? If you took that away, now I'm obviously a bit of a libertarian thinker, so we were always looking for different ideas and concepts. But
you were growing weed in the other end of the caravan. No, I get it. I hear you. Yep.
Yeah, but imagine if all of a sudden that wasn't allowed. Yeah. What do you do? And I made it work.
In the US, we see the proliferation of trailer parks over there, and they unfortunately, once someone ends up on that trailer park treadmill, it really is again another thing that just holds you down, because if you buy anything like resembling a nice trailer, it's not going to be worth what you paid for it when you want to sell it, and by and large they can't own the land that the trailer is sitting on. So once someone gets below that threshold in financial resources where they end up in a trailer park, generally they're stuck. It's very, very difficult to get back out again. But I'd also apply it to jobs. We have this idea in Australia that because we have this wonderfully high minimum wage, that everyone is earning, a living wage. Everyone can survive, even the barista, even everybody else. But this is why we see such enormous popularity in the gig economy. Right. This is why we see people driving around doing Uber Eats deliveries and these sorts of things, because they're actually technically subcontractors. They're earning well under the minimum wage. Right. You take a lot of small business owners that are effectively self-employed. They're running their own business, but they are their business. And if you just look at the hours they spend with clients, well, maybe they're earning somewhere near the minimum wage. But to get every hour in front of a client, they've also got to be doing all the quoting, all the compliance, all the BAS statements and paperwork that goes along behind that. And all of a sudden, they're working for less than the minimum wage. If you look at anyone who's on welfare and receiving substantial amounts of welfare who then gets a job, even if we assume that their job is at minimum wage, every hour they work reduces how much welfare they get. So guess what? As a net return, they're working for less than the minimum wage. And we've created this really perverse system where we're sitting here thinking, oh, we've got this wonderful country with this wonderful minimum wage here, and therefore we've solved the employment problem. Actually, what we've done is created a barrier that keeps a lot of people out of regular employment because they're not yet worth minimum wage. And as a result, they end up in the gig economy. They end up doing, in the black economy, which to me is actually the real economy. That's the true free market is actually the black economy. But we tell ourselves that we've solved this problem. Actually, we've just pushed it into a different place. We've just displaced the problem across to somewhere where we pretend it doesn't exist.
Mate, 100%. I was well and truly overpaid at $5.95 an hour in the early 2000s, I can tell you. It took at least a few months before I was worth even close to $5.95 an hour. And you get the long-term benefit. And, I knuckled that out for a long time. And, mate, it's a legitimate thing. It's just an entry barrier. It's not it doesn't lift anything. And people go, oh, well, you want kids to work for less than a living wage? Well, most of them live at home with their parents. Yeah, if they're kids. They don't need a living wage, get real.
And here's the thing. If we think that someone can walk out of school already worth $20, whatever it is, dollars an hour, then we'd better take a good hard look at our school system. Because our school system is not churning out people that are worth $20 an hour. Right?
Mate, from what I've seen, when I used to employ quite a handful of people, and I'd sort of sit there and scratch my head going, well, I probably don't want to do that again anytime soon under the current workplace law. But, you don't see these kids coming through the doors, and I'm hospitality based. So, you see the ones that are coming through, and they're supposed to be on $15, $20 an hour, or in some cases 15, 16-year-olds pushing nearly $30 an hour on a Sunday. And you go, sorry, you're no more efficient at washing dishes on a Sunday than you were on Monday. Sorry, this just isn't justifiable. Yeah. And it's pretty arse about face. But, mate, I suppose one of the key things you've been up to lately that I really, really wanted to nail for this week's episode I watched a fairly serious-looking protest yesterday. I thought, according to the mainstream media, all the lockdowns were finished and Victoria was free again.
Yeah, you could get that impression listening to the radio jockeys and the TV presenters, but let's remember that these are people who still have their jobs. They're still happily sitting there on their salaries, and the only way they were affected by the lockdowns in the first place was that they couldn't drive to their favorite cafe and have their eggs Benny for breakfast. They had to go to a cafe that was within 5 kilometers. So to them, 25-kilometer limit. I can have my mates around. We can open a bottle of wine and talk about how wonderful socialism would be. Life is back to normal where it's all over. It's all finished. Of course, if you're in the hospitality industry, if you're running a business, you've still got massive restrictions on how many people you can have inside your premises. You've still got the restrictions on how far people can travel and how many people can gather. I have a friend who got married only a month ago, and it was literally her groom, the celebrant, and 2 witnesses, and that was all they were allowed to have. And the rest of us are sitting there watching it on Zoom. And this is a young lady who's been a friend of my wife's for decades. And as a group, everyone in that group has now gotten married. She was the last one to get married, and she'd been there at the weddings of every single one of those girlfriends in that group. None of them could come legally. None of them were allowed to be there for her to celebrate her day. And these may seem like small things, and Daniel Andrews likes to remind us this isn't about human rights. This is about human lives. But there are much less intrusive ways to limit the damage of something like a serious flu, a serious virus like what the coronavirus is, that don't involve taking away people's freedoms and don't involve essentially what Daniel Andrews has done is basically said the government is allowed to dictate literally and micromanage literally every single aspect of your life. There is no aspect of your life that is beyond the reach of government. And he's justified that on the basis of having to control this virus. But literally, funerals, weddings, the police are now supposedly, I don't think it's actually lawful at all, but legally, under the state of emergency, supposedly the police can just walk into your home without a warrant. They no longer need a warrant to come and literally search the place to make sure you don't have people hiding in cupboards or under tables and you've exceeded the maximum number of people that you're allowed to have in your house. We've seen people being arrested for wanting to protest, and they were in parts of Victoria that weren't under stage 4 lockdown. They were under stage 3 lockdown, where protest and gathering for protest hadn't actually been outlawed. And yet they literally sent in a team of 6 police officers to go in there and arrest a pregnant mum because she posted a Facebook post about wanting to protest about these laws. It is out of control at a level that is hard to appreciate. And even looking at the videos and looking at the photographs, I don't think really conveys just how horrifying it is to want to get together with other concerned Victorians, stand up for what are literally human rights issues. This has become literally a human rights issue, and to see hundreds of heavily armed, well-equipped police officers with horses, riot units, the mobile trucks with the cages on the back, the mobile prison trucks, so they can process lots of you and throw you all in the back. All showing up there, and literally what we saw yesterday, they created a police cordon and separated the crowd. There's 1,500 or so people there, and they managed to capture 500 or so of them, and literally just put a ring of police around them so they couldn't go anywhere, and then plucked them out one by one and processed them. It took down all their details, sent them fines, arrested some of them, dragged them off to the police station. One of the people that they arrested was David Limbrick, MLC, a member of the Legislative Council here in Victoria and a member for the Liberal Democrats. And I already had a lot of time for David, but boy, my respect for him has gone up to a whole new level. For him coming along and getting involved and actually being deep enough in the crowd that he was part of that group that got caught. And then he didn't try and play the "but I'm a member of Parliament" card and get out of it. He stood there and he allowed himself to be treated the way that every other person had been treated, so that he can now stand up in Parliament and speak with authority on what's going on and how the Victorian government is treating the Victorian people right now. But I appreciate the support that we're getting from interstate. There's a lot of people sending messages of support, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, without actually being there and actually seeing it, it is just, I think, really difficult to grasp just what it feels like and just how much you look at this and go, this isn't Australia. I don't recognize my own country here.
Yeah. Mate, it's from where, and again, I'm in regional New South Wales, where I'm not even sure the coppers out here have heard of COVID, fortunately. I'm regional
good
enough where look, and as I said, I was really, really proud to see David was there yesterday. Like all libertarians, we all sit there, and I try not to take too many shots at other libertarians, because the whole idea of it is we accept everybody for their nuance, and that's a big thing.
Yep.
And I like David, and I know on occasion David's looked at me and gone, he's a bit mad, which is fine. He and I can talk about that, which is good. But I was really, really proud to be a part of the Liberal Democrats while they've been standing up. Tim and David, Tim Quilty and David Limbrick. Anybody who's not sure who is watching needs to check these guys out. If you're in Victoria, you need to help them stay elected. But I was really proud of him for doing that, because it takes you're putting a lot of risk in. There's a reason that being a politician in Australia pays so well, because to a point you're supposed to toe the line. You're not supposed to be doing things like that. So it's a really good thing to see that he's actually jumped in the ring with the people and put it out there. So I thought it was great. I love the work you do with it, mate. I'm always sharing when I see you doing streams and stuff like that, because a lot of people get a bit, I don't want to call it confused, because I'm certainly no social media expert, but a lot of people will like things, but if you don't share it, nobody else sees it.
Correct.
Now, I don't know how the algorithms and stuff works. I'm not a tech guy, but what I do know is if I'm running a small business, I appreciate the like. Yeah. But the share reaches another 20 people. It's just digital word of mouth in my.
There are two things. There are two things that cause Facebook to push it out: sharing and commenting. When you share it, obviously it'll go out to some people on your news feed. But when you comment, you'll notice as you scroll through your news feed, sometimes something weird will come up, something that you've never interacted with. And it'll come up and you'll see it, that you're seeing it because such and such, one of your friends, commented on this. Yeah. And if that's a friend that you've had a bit of interaction with, then Facebook goes, oh, you're pretty close with that guy. That guy just commented on that thing. So we'll feed that thing into your news feed. So all I would say to everyone watching now, when you see something that you think is important and you want more people to see it, share it and comment on it. And that way you're giving Facebook two different pathways for pushing that out to other people in your friends list. Yeah, mate, that's a top pointer for everybody. And that goes for everything, for your small business friends, for causes that you care about, for certainly from this, as far as this little program goes, liberty and freedom, because that's what it's all about. And I've got friends in Victoria who aren't in the political sphere. And when I speak to them, I send them a message, hey, mate, how you holding up? How's things? I can't believe I voted for that bastard. And I sit there and I go, I really hope that carries through, but I've got a really, really poor feeling in my gut that Dan Andrews is going to get re-elected. If there was an election held today, I think you're right. I think he would be re-elected. I think the opposition here in Victoria, with the only exception in my lifetime being Jeff Kennett, the opposition has been completely ineffective. I actually contributed to the election of Ted Baillieu, the only other Liberal Premier that we've really had since I became aware of politics in Victoria. The only Liberal Premiers we've had were Jeff Kennett. He did 3 terms, and then Ted Baillieu. And I had some contribution to him getting elected. I can tell that story if you want me to, but that's by the by. And then he came in, he did 1 term, and he was completely ineffective. He was utterly useless and deserved to be turfed out again. And him getting turfed out is the reason we've got Daniel Andrews now. And so unfortunately, not only do we have a situation where a lot of people, I've been suggesting for a little while now that we need to rename Stockholm Syndrome. We need to start calling it Melbourne Syndrome, because I think we're being a bit unfair to Stockholm by associating it with them. Because Melbourne we are the Stockholm Syndrome capital of the world right now. Unfortunately, that's made worse by the fact that the Liberals are offering no alternate vision, no alternate policy platform, no other way of dealing with this virus, no different, no variations on policy settings. They're basically saying that they would have done the exact same thing. They give up and they stand up and give a few fine speeches in Parliament. They like to talk about human rights and these sorts of things, but in practice, their policies would have been for all intents and purposes the same. I've been having a bit of I take shots at the Liberal Party and Labor Party indiscriminately. If I think they're doing shit, I'll throw it at them. And people go, oh no, well you should join the Liberal Party and change it from the inside. And it's like, no, that's they're beyond help. They're sort of, the soul is sold. And I think the Queensland elections gave us a fair indication of what happens when the Liberal Party's trying to play the same game as the Labor Party. The Labor Party do that game better.
because they're loud and proud socialists. They advocate what they do, and you've got the Liberal Party who have lost any identity whatsoever. They're not sure if they're the old Liberal Democrats or, the current Liberal Democrats is sort of where they kind of go, well, that's sort of what we are. You should vote for us because we're like them. And it's like, no, you're not. You're nothing like us because you've got no principle. And then on the other side, they go, we like the Labor Party because we want to give you socialist stuff. And it's like, you guys have just lost the plot. You've got no grounding anymore whatsoever.
You're absolutely right. I got invited to speak at a branch meeting of the Liberal Party, Victorian Liberal Party, many years ago when I first started my water series. And I stood up and I said to the guy who invited me, I said, this is what I want to do. And he said, oh, yeah, good, do it. But trust me, people aren't going to want to talk to you afterwards, but you should definitely do it. So the person that invited me was on my side. And I stood up and I read out the speech that Robert Menzies gave when he founded the Liberal Party. And I then asked the members that were sitting there to please explain to me how the current Victorian Liberal Party's policies aligned with that vision that Robert Menzies set out when he founded the Liberal Party. And to say that my reception was frosty after that point in time would be a pretty significant understatement. So this is a problem across for the Liberal Party right across the country. And just in case there's people outside of Australia watching, we have a really confused nomenclature here in Australia. The Liberal Party is actually supposedly our more conservative party, and the Labor Party is actually our more sort of left-wing, progressive, I guess, as Americans would refer to it, party. So when we talk about the Liberal Party, we're actually talking about the guys that are supposedly the more fiscally conservative, reducing government debt, reducing government spending, reducing government welfare, defending our liberties and freedoms, all this sort of stuff. And Robert Menzies, when he founded the party at a federal level, he spoke specifically about opposing socialism and opposing the march of socialism through Australian political culture. And the party as it stands today are, I would say, more left-wing than the left-wing parties were back when Menzies gave that speech.
Mate, 100%. And you look at even somebody like Mark Latham, who people go, oh, well, you left the Labor Party. No, the Labor Party left him. You look at you look at most of these things. Everybody's just moved this far across from where they all started. Yeah. None of it's relevant anymore. The Greens really aren't about the environment. The Liberal Party, I'm just there. I'm so disillusioned with them because 10 years ago I would have said I was a Liberal Party voter. This is before I knew what the Liberal Democrats was. I sort of, that makes sense. And now in hindsight, I'm sitting here and I've got people saying to me, well, you should support us because you're a Liberal Democrat or you're a Libertarian. And I'm going, you guys are not anywhere near what I want to stand for in 2020, I can assure you.
And look, I do know some good people that have joined the Liberal Party with that vision of changing them from the inside. I would observe two things, and I'm going to make these very generalized because I'm not having a go at anyone specifically, but I would observe two things about that. Number one, they do not, to me, appear to have had any impact on the Liberal Party in terms of making them more conservative. At best, they might be able to argue that they've done some damage limitation. And when I say conservative, I shouldn't use the word conservative. Making them more pro-freedom is what I should say. They could argue perhaps that the Liberal Party would have been even worse without them. But that's a pretty weak argument to make. And I think highlights just how deep the problem really is, if that's the argument they want to make. And the other thing I would say is that my observation is that those individuals have largely been absorbed into the party machine. And when I see them coming out with certain statements in support of certain things or opposition to other things, and towing the party line, being wheeled out in the media as the token libertarians within the party, and sort of being used as almost as a defensive arm by the Liberal Party against the libertarian sort of people who might support libertarian values. There's just been some really disappointing things happen with some of these people that I do know went in there with the best of intentions. And they're nice people. I'd happily have a barbecue with them. I like them, but the reality is the party machine, these parties became the big two for a reason. They are very well-oiled machines, and they know how to maintain party discipline. And they will sit there. I mean, it's a really difficult situation. People tell me, why don't you go into politics? And there's two reasons. Number one, I don't want to waste my life on something as stupid as that. But number two, I'm not actually convinced that in the end I would achieve any more than what these other people have achieved going into these big machines and thinking they're going to change them from the inside. I don't think I have some special talent that these guys don't. If these guys are losing their way, losing their values, and ending up becoming a part of the problem as a result of joining these parties. I have no reason to believe that that wouldn't also be my fate. I don't think they went in there with any less idealism and any less committed to changing the party from the inside than what I would. And I've no reason to believe that I would succeed where they've failed. So I tend to agree. This change it from the inside idea, I think, is a very, very, very poor idea. We are in Australia blessed with a preferential voting system, which gives us an opportunity to vote for minor parties whilst not sort of throwing our vote away, if I can use the American term. You know, right now we have the American elections going on, and we've got a situation where Jo Jorgensen, the Libertarian Party candidate over there, last time I checked, was sitting on about 1.1% of the vote.
She's great.
Love her. She does a great job. She comes across so well. I think she would make a far better president than either the Democratic or the Republican nominee would. Sorry, too much talking, not enough smoking.
Don't be sorry. Don't do it. Don't do it.
But you're in a situation over there where, you know, there's a lot of people who would love to vote for Jo Jorgensen, but they cannot abide the thought of the Democrats taking power at the moment. So when they walk into a polling booth, if they're in a state that they have any concerns might be close, they feel compelled that they have to vote for most of the people that I know over there. They feel compelled that they have to vote for Trump, despite his many obvious shortcomings, because they don't want to hand power to Biden, who will very quickly get removed for medical reasons, and we'll have President Kamala Harris. You know, and that would be a disaster for so many different reasons. And so in the end, they actually can't vote the way they actually believe, or they feel they can't vote the way they actually believe and vote for the Libertarian candidate. Because if they do, that's just their vote. And if the Libertarian candidate doesn't get up, then they have no influence on the outcome between the Republicans and the Democrats. Here in Australia, you can vote, you know, Liberal Democratic Party, for instance, and then organize your preferences beneath that. And that gives us an opportunity to actually, if we organize well enough and if we focus well enough and we run a good enough ground game, and this is where the major parties do excel, and minor parties, it is an uphill battle as a minor party to run a really good ground game. You can end up with candidates that get across the line. In the upper house is easier, and that's why we see more Liberal Democrats senators or upper house members than we do lower house members. But it's possible for it to happen in the lower house as well, because you can get people to vote for you, and then further down the ticket their preference out of the majors. And so therefore they're going to be much more willing to actually give you that frontline vote in the first place. And in the American system, the presidential system over there, it's almost impossible. So we are blessed with that, and we really ought to be making much better use of that, and spending a lot more of our time focusing on and looking at and voting for the minor parties before we then eventually further down the ticket pick which is the lesser of the two evils in the major parties.
Mate, 100%. What were your thoughts on Queensland and what happened to One Nation?
Really interesting. I don't have an explanation for that at this moment. I haven't really done much digging with why their vote declined in the way that it did. It's very disappointing. I spent four days with Senator Malcolm Roberts in a plane because he's taken a very keen interest in the Murray-Darling Basin and all of the water issues around that, and I'm very grateful to him for taking a very genuine interest in that. And look, I have a great deal of policy differences with One Nation. Let me just put that out there in the first place. But having spent a few days with Senator Roberts, I found him to be very impressive. I could not help but sit there and think, if we had more politicians like you, even with policies that I disagreed with, the country would still be in a much better place, because he genuinely listens. He's a furious note taker. He's got this notebook with him all the time, and he sits down and he talks to people, and he's just taking notes, and he's got one of his assistants there taking notes, and they'll be conferring with each other and so forth. And then we'd get in the plane, having met with some locals in a particular part of the basin. We'd get back in the plane, and he'd be on the intercom talking to us, and he'd be grilling me because obviously of my work on that subject. He'd be grilling me. He'd be grilling the pilot, who's a farmer up there. And you could see he was putting the pieces together. He was taking all the different threads from all the different people he spoke to in all these different places where they've all got their own particular agendas and their own particular perspectives. And he was putting the pieces together really, really well. And he was just on this relentless pursuit to try and genuinely understand And then as he comes to understand something, he then stands up, and he stands up for what he thinks is the right solution, regardless of whether he thinks it's going to be politically popular. Now, again, on the Murray-Darling Basin, he and I are very well aligned in terms of solutions to it. In other areas we're polar opposites. But if we had more politicians like that were actually just genuinely wanting to understand, and then genuinely looking for what is the best solution here, regardless of politics, excuse me, our country would be in a much better place. So it's unfortunate to see a situation where a party that has managed to find some talent like that is getting a bit of a shellacking in the polls. So I can't explain why that's happened. I think it's very disappointing to see Anastasia Palaszczuk get back in as the premier there. It's hard to argue that she deserved that, but at the same time, my understanding is that they suffered very much the same problem we have in Victoria, and that is a completely ineffective opposition that really are offering no alternative. They're not really offering any alternate vision for people to get behind, and as such, people just go, well, better the devil you know.
Mate, and that's 100%. The other argument that I saw for it was James Ashby from One Nation. They sort of grilled him on election night, and I'm similar to you. I don't really have any great love for One Nation out and out, but I have found over the years that I find their candidates that I've met. I'm friends with Emma Eros, and Mark Latham and I had a bit to do with each other when Mark was in Lib Dems, and I've met some really good quality people. Some of the candidates I've run against or worked with and whatever, and good people. Even where you disagree, you can have a good, sensible political discourse. It's really nice. They're generally open to a discussion about things, even when you disagree. But James Ashby came out and he was talking about the collapse of the local media outlets, and how basically a lot of the small local newspapers have been swallowed up, and a lot of the regional media has been swallowed up. And it's a pretty good argument. So I'm from really, really regional New South Wales. The little local paper in the town I live in is very effective for the local community. The nanas there read it. They're not on Facebook. They're not on News FM. They're reading the local paper. And I'm watching a lot of the other little towns nearby where their papers are disappearing. And I think there's a fair argument for that these local candidates can't get the traction. I know if you're not a Liberal Party or a Labor Party member, the chances of you getting into any of these media outlets is
you can't get column inches. Yeah. You can't get column inches. You can't get interviews.
So if you're in that situation and you've got the best of a bad bunch, i.e. Palaszczuk, and you've got such an ineffectual opposition, One Nation who? No, do they even running candidates this year? Don't know. Can't see anything about them in the local bugle.
And no offense to the Liberal Democrats, but even getting David Leyonhjelm in as a senator at a federal level was in part the luck of the draw, having Liberal Democrats at the top of the ticket. Some people saw Liberal and went tick. And it was also when it was a double dissolution election, and it was just, there were a number of things that kind of had to go in the favor of the party to actually to get him in the first place. And of course, the majors have jumped on that and made it more difficult now for minor parties to get in. They're obviously trying to. People think that the worst thing that could happen to, let's say, the Liberal Party is for the Labor Party to win. And that's completely untrue. The worst thing that could happen to the Liberal Party is for the minor parties to actually really start gaining traction. They don't mind the Labor Party winning, so long as it's only between the two of them. They know.
That's right, 100%.
If they just wait another 3 years, 6 years, 9 years, however long, they wait their turn, they'll get in. The thought of the minor parties really starting to upset the apple cart and starting to shift Australia towards a situation that we see overseas where governments are always minority governments and they have to make deals with these minor parties. That's what scares them far more than the other guy winning.
Oh, mate, 100% I agree with you there, no doubt about it. I've got a bit of a theory. Well, it's not even a theory. Obviously, there's discussions with the Liberal Democrats talking about a name change. I think any advantage that may have been gained by having the word Liberal in the name, and I discovered it on Eden Monaro on the campaign trail, mate. It's now just as toxic to us as it is helpful to us.
Correct.
And I'd sort of be along the line with many people where I'd like to see a name change for the party and go with either the outright Libertarian Party or the Freedom Party or something a bit simpler. Australians, you don't want to sort of shit on the intellect because I'm as bogan Aussie as it gets, but freedom. People vote Greens because they think they're trying to save the environment. People hate voting. Right. They do it as a chore. Most people don't do it because they have any great interest in any of it. Oh, I'll vote
Correct.
for the Greens because they're going to save the environment.
Yeah. And unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately, there is a very rational reason why people don't give politics a lot of their time. Are you familiar with the concept of rational ignorance?
Yeah, well, as a concept, yeah.
Yeah, the concept, yeah. So this idea that basically there are certain things that we have so little influence over in our lives that just kind of happen that it makes no sense for us to invest an enormous amount of time or energy to understand or try and change it, because in the end we have very little influence over it. So the rational response is to actually largely ignore it, to largely remain ignorant about it. And there is a large amount of kind of rational ignorance when it comes to politics. You've got one vote out of 26 million people in the country, or out of millions of people in your state. The chances of your vote really influencing any outcome is very, very slim. So why would you spend the time to actually really understand the issues and understand the candidates and really carefully place your vote, given that chances are that time is a waste? You've literally thrown that time away because you still won't have made any meaningful difference. So there's this rational ignorance problem, and I understand why people do it. But unfortunately, when lots of people do it, you end up with a situation where all of those people, if they'd all invested that time, could have made a difference. But each of them individually is looking at it going, well, I can't really make a difference, so it doesn't make sense for me to go and spend my time on this. And that's where we're at in Victorian, Australian politics generally, and state politics in each state. So simple messaging is crucial. You've got to cut through. And for what it's worth, I never want to get into politics, but I keep being asked by people. I get asked, I'm not going to say every week, but it'd be every couple of weeks. I'm being approached by somebody. Oh, will you run for this minor party? Will you run for that major party? Will you do something? And I'm asked literally every couple of days by one of my followers, why aren't you in politics? Why can't I vote for you somewhere? And I don't want to do it. But a party that is simply named Free Victoria, Free New South Wales, Free Australia. It's the Free Party, right? But then named for each of the states and named at a federal level, I think has a chance to actually get some people's attention. To have people will read that and instinctively go, oh, that's interesting to me. I don't yet understand who they are or what that means, but that piqued my interest, and I'll now give them 30 seconds instead of the 0 seconds that I would have given someone with a name that I don't understand, like Liberal Democrats. I don't know what that means. And so you're going to get 0 seconds of my time. Free Victoria, that I'll give you 30 seconds of my time. I'll hear your next sentence, and if your next sentence is good, I'll listen to the one after that as well. And unfortunately, that's what it comes down to is that messaging, and you've got to. I mean, look at Barack Obama, hope and change. It's a completely meaningless phrase. People applied whatever meaning they wanted into it.
And rainbows.
Yeah, that's right. But it was so short that he could get people to hear it in the 0 seconds that they wanted to give him, right? He could get that out. He could get that said. Free Australia, Free Victoria, Free New South Wales, Free Queensland, as a party, the Free Victoria Party. That is going to get people's attention in a way that, unfortunately, a name like Liberal Democrats just doesn't.
Mate, 100%. And I guess I looked at the concept of a libertarian party, speaking with a few of my American libertarian friends, and they go, oh, well, why would you call yourselves that if you're the Libertarian Party? And I obviously wasn't around 20 years ago when they founded Liberal Democrats. But the other argument was I've probably had when I look back at my life, I go, I've probably been a libertarian since I was a teenager, or almost in primary school, Mum would argue. I just didn't know what the hell a libertarian was. And until about 5 years ago, when I discovered the Liberal Democrats, I didn't still at that stage know where I fit politically or what it was called. I just knew I didn't like paying all these taxes, and I didn't like the government sticking its nose into my business. Yeah. It was just F off and leave me alone. That was my political philosophy, and I didn't know the name for it. And I think that's probably a large portion of Australia and even America where people just don't know what that is.
If you're going to go through the trouble of a name change, I wouldn't go to Libertarian. It doesn't have enough capital in Australia. People don't understand it. The only people who understand it are the ones that are already paying attention to politics, and they're going to find you anyway. They're going to find you no matter what your name is. You need to write your name so that it gets the attention of the people that aren't interested in politics.
100%, mate. I agree 100%. Mate, so just as a closing, because I know you've had a cracking day. I've had a cracking day. It's been pretty wild. Mate, who's going to win? Is Trump going to get across the line? Is it going to the High Court? What do you reckon?
Trump is going to get across the line. He's going to end up with, I think, 296 electoral college votes. That is the most likely outcome. The second most likely outcome is the Pennsylvania swings with all of the postal votes that they haven't started opening yet in Pennsylvania. I don't think that's going to actually change anything. I don't think it'll go to the Democrats. If it does, Trump will still win with 276. Even the other battleground states that I look at and I go, well, he could lose here, he could lose there. I cannot see him getting below 272 electoral college votes. I just can't see it happening. And my honest expectation is that he will hold Pennsylvania. He leads by 700,000 odd votes there at the moment. And I just can't see that deficit being pulled back, even with a couple of million postal votes. You know, let's say there's 2 million postal votes. What you're effectively saying is that only about 700,000 of those postal votes will be Trump, and 1.4 million of them will be for Biden. And I just can't see that happening in Pennsylvania at all. So no, I think it's going to be about a 296 electoral college votes to Trump. And once again, he's going to lose the popular vote. And that's largely on the back of California, where you just have an enormously high concentration of committed, locked-in Democrat voters. They're never going to vote for anybody else. We are seeing the one that's interesting to me is Arizona flipping to Democrat for what I believe is the first time ever. I can't put my hand on my heart and say that for sure, but certainly the first time.
I heard that it was the second time ever. But
is it? Okay, yeah.
I was reading something this afternoon, and I'm sure they said it was the second time that it's happened.
First time in a while, certainly. And so that's what's really going to peg him back from his results in the 2016 election. But all of the states that he flipped in 2016, Wisconsin, Iowa, Idaho, not Illinois, what's the other one up by the Great Lakes, Michigan, and Pennsylvania and Florida, I expect all of those to stay with him. And in fact, everyone now agrees that all of them except Pennsylvania are definitely staying Republican. They're all signed, sealed, and delivered. Pennsylvania is the only one of those that's really still up in the air. And I just can't see Biden pulling back a 700,000 vote deficit on the back of the postal ballots. I just can't see that happening.
Yeah. Well, mate, look, let's hope, because as much as I'd prefer Joe Jorgensen to win, if I've got a choice between a senile old man who can't put a sentence together and one who's got a bit of fight left in him, I know which one I'd rather see holding people like China and Russia and all the rest of them to account and saying, hey, hang on, no.
Well, if you want to get proof of that, have a look. People have been posting two charts that have correlated with each other quite closely recently. One of them are the bookies' odds of Biden winning, and the other one is the value of the Chinese yuan. And when the odds for Biden winning increased, the Chinese yuan went up with it. And then as reality set in today and the odds of Biden winning dropped, the Chinese yuan has dropped by a significant amount at exactly the same time. So I think the global financial community understand the implications of this election from that point of view. Look, I don't like Trump's protectionism. I don't like the way that he handles trade and this idea that, we're going to put tariffs on them, we're going to punish them. No, tariffs are always on your own people. It's your people that pay tariffs, not the country that you think you're putting tariffs on. But having said that, if I take my purist libertarian hat off and I kind of accept the idea that you can use monetary policy and trade policy as a bit of a geopolitical tool, that is what Trump has been doing. He's been using that as a geopolitical tool. I think there is a fairly compelling argument to say that is working in terms of keeping China's belligerence in check. As much as they have been very belligerent in the last 4 years, I would fairly confidently predict that they would have. They played Obama for a fool, and they would have continued to play.
I think they drew Biden up and spit him out pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah, and Clinton would have been exactly the same. They played Obama for a fool whilst Clinton was his Secretary of State, so she was just as useless in that regard. And I think they recognize that Trump isn't a fool for his many, many faults. He's not statesman. He's not a statesman at all. And I'll reiterate what I said at the start of the show. It's just so disappointing that that out of 350 million people, these are the best two that they put forward for the American public to vote on. But this is where we are. and I think a Trump win is less bad than a Biden win for lots of different reasons. And I predicted a Trump win yesterday. I predicted Trump would win in 2016. I was there in the US in 2016. My wife and I both came home and just said, Trump's going to win this. And it's going to be, in the end, I was surprised he didn't get the popular vote as well. That was the only thing that surprised me about the 2016 election. And I called this one for Trump, and people assume, oh, why are you a Trump supporter? Hold it. I'm not. Right. Making a prediction is not the same as saying I like that. I'm just saying this is what I think is going to happen. Right. I predicted Trump. I posted it on my page last night. Again, having said it multiple times along the way, I posted it on my page again last night. And here we are. Everyone's shocked and surprised at how well Trump has done. Well, no, not the people that were paying attention, just the people that had an axe to grind and a partisan viewpoint.
The people wearing the blinkers and the special glasses, mate. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
100%.
exactly.
I've been saying very similar for the last few weeks, mate. But look, I hope Trump gets up, not because I like Trump best of all. It's because I like him better than the alternative. Mate, thank you for your time. No doubt in a few weeks I'll probably harass you again and say, hey, do you want to do another one? Because why not?
Feel free to harass me anytime.
Oh, mate, that's a two-way street, of course. If there's anything I can ever help you out with, never be shy to ask. And, mate, look, have a great week, great weekend. Continue the good fight, because I know I appreciate it, and I'm sure Victoria appreciates it. And I know that your following's growing rapidly, as well it should. Mate, flick me through whatever links you'd like in the description. And, ladies and gentlemen, thank Topher Field. Check out all of his stuff. If you don't know who he is yet, now's the time to start getting into Topher. He's brilliant. And, mate, have a great night.
Thank you very much. I already have. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Resolute TV. Remember, we have t-shirts, we have hemp products, dog shampoo, cooking oil, we have it all. And if you want to be a part of it, just subscribe and communicate with us and it'll be great.